Man, that was a shitty greeting. Anyway, last time I talked about phonology and how to make syllables and shit, and now comes the real shit. How the fuck do you actually make the second step of the language? Roots. So basically there is two main naturally occurring types of roots. Syllabic and three consonant. Basically syllabic is roots like dent, for dentist, etc. You can have also monosyllabic roots like problem, because it's problematic. There is no further way you can reduce the word problem. If you want to understand what a root is, it's the tiniest possible part of meaning. What's a three consonant root? It's shit basically what the Jews and Arabs do. In other words, don't do that. Otherwise, you are a Semite. But if you really want to, something like KTB, this is something that has to do with books, let's say. So if you want to write book in, let's say, Arabic, you would say kitab. Because the E and A, let's say, indicate, that would be book object. But let's say if you want to say book room, I'm making shit up, obviously, I don't speak Arabic, why would I? Let's say it would be khut, that would mean book room, and would probably, for example, could mean a library. The other thing with roots is, you can have multiple roots for the same thing. For example, in English, you have the root dent for tooth and the root tooth for tooth. Both are equivalent. I don't remember how you write tooth. One is used, for example, in toothpaste, and the other is, for example, used in dentist or dental hygiene, etc. One comes from Latin, one is native to English. And another thing about roots is, let's imagine a triangle. Can you imagine a triangle? Let's say, let's imagine a fucking triangle. 1, 2, 3. Unlike gender, languages are kind of on a spectrum. Let's say here you have isolating languages. Those are basically languages which have words which are isolated. You don't see much connection between roots, or the connections are hidden. One of such examples is English. English has a fuck ton of loan words from French, English, nigger speak, even some from Latin, Celtic languages. As such, often you have like 15 different roots for a single thing to say, which is not conducive to anything. The other type of language is, no, that was an isolating, agglutinative. So yeah, agglutinative languages. So yeah, agglutinative languages are completely opposite. That's your shit like Japanese or Korean, for example. Let's say in Japanese, of course, don't know fucking Japanese, so making shit on the top. You have, let's say, Nagasaki. Let's say Na means city, Ga means witch, Sa means god, and Ka means blown up, which would mean Nagasaki, city which got blown up. That's why you can sometimes see, for example, that's like, for example, it's wrong to say that Inuit has 32 different words for a type of snow. It's actually that you simply, instead of putting in adjectives, you just alter the word by inputting the adjective in the word, so it's not really factually correct. Okay. And the third type of language, I forgot how it's called, but it's basically you have a word and you alter it by adding shit to it. Let's say books, and you then add bouquet, and it would not mean bouquet, instead it would mean like 15 books, or like a stack of books specifically. It's basically languages in which you add tiny shit to the end to alter the meaning of words. One of such languages is actually Polish, where very often to create new words you just add small bits at the end of the words or before words. So I'm really prepared for it. So examples of languages and where they fall on the scale. Let's, for example, see English. English would be a bit on the scale of the preposition shit. it does have very few agglutinative traits. I would put it here because it's mostly isolating. English. Polish, another language I actually speak, would be, I would say, also around here. That would be because we use prepositions a lot, but we do have a big amount of loanwords as well. Now, things get a bit more interesting when we talk about shit like German. Where do you think German would fall? A language that is extremely related to English. Alright, you can't answer me. Fuck, this is not Dora the Explorer. It's actually mostly agglutinative. And I would put it around here. Agglutinative. Mainly because this is why German has such fucking longest words like Schlüsselfach or shit like that. Like, this is just a very short one, actually. But German is an odd one because there is a street theory which says that languages go over a cycle. First, you become agglutinative. First, a language goes from agglutinative to the preposition shit one. Then it goes into an isolating language. And of course the arrows are gay as shit in this sky curry. So it goes here. But then an isolating language, basically the words it has that are isolated can once again degrade into roots and can be used as roots. So in this case, that's what happened to German. German has a lot of loanwords and it's a generally big language. But its words can also be used as roots and can be applied to and just added to each other agglutinatively. But it's pretty close to an isolating language and it does have some trait from prepositions, so maybe I should actually move it like more here. If I had to actually be fair in trying to assess shit on this weird triangle. What else is there to know about roots? First of all, these are just the natural occurring types of roots, the ones I could figure out, there probably is more. But what's some roots which are also interesting but don't exist in nature? For example, there is the D-consonant root. D-consonant roots actually existed in history as far as I remember. If you want to do a D-consonant root system, make a very big inventory of letters, because instead of shuffling around 3 letters into roots, you can only do it with 2 letters. You also, another thing that's interesting about both 3-consonant and D-consonant root systems is that sometimes you can use clusters and classify them as roots for grammatical purposes. For example, let's say you have gt. This is obviously not a single letter. This is G and T, and you can pronounce as gt. But for the purpose of making a syllable, you can say that your language considers this as one letter, and that does occur naturally very often. So that way you can, let's say, falsely inflate the number of possible roots you get. But that's where you're slowly starting to get into the border between D-consonant and 3-consonant systems. Another thing which I played around is it's a consonant tone root system. But that was mostly an experimental shit. So it's basically the consonant and tone decide how the meaning of the word, like the base of the root, and then vowels are applied in the middle. So tones are lexical, like in Chinese, not grammatical, and like in nigger speaks. Okay, what's other systems of roots? There is mostly none as far as I know, other ones. There's some alternate ones. Okay, now let's get to the shit that no one likes. Grammar. Unlike real Nazis, no one likes a grammar Nazi. So there's basically 3 types of grammar. VSO, SOV, OVS or something. It basically means object, subject, and verb in what order they come. O, object, S, subject, V, verb. They can come in any order possible, and actually all 3 combinations exist in like nature and wild languages, so go wild with this. The only important thing, you have to stay consistent. And again, there's a lot of videos on the VSO shit, so I'm probably gonna just link that instead of explaining it myself. But there is a good way to circumvent this. For example, in German, the word order actually switches if you ask questions. Why is that possible? It's possible because of cases. I would say that cases are one of those things which make a language infinitely more complex when you try to write the grammar. And that's why I usually just leave them out, just like, fuck it. And if I ever do, I just use the simplest system of cases that exists, the one that exists in German. Just accusative, dative, basically just like, that's already half of them, just like 4. But honestly, accusative and dative is all you need. So three cases, 4 cases is all you need if you want to simulate a case system. But there is reasons to make a bigger case system. For example, the thing with cases is, a case basically always makes it so that you have an object marker, and subject marker. And verbs are usually marked in ways that you can already tell that that's the verb separately. That means that in languages that are heavy in case, for example, Icelandic or Polish, you can basically put words in whatever order you want. Of course, there is a preferred order you use in normal writing, but in poetry, you will very often see in Polish poetry, for example, that sentences are built in a very unnatural way that's still understandable due to the existence of cases. Another use for cases is the fact that, let's say, all the objects and subjects gets the same ending, so it's very easy for rhymes. So if you want to make an outline, actually making a system of cases is very beneficial. Another thing which is useful is grammatical gender. Grammatical gender, actually only in the European languages have naturally occurring grammatical gender that's tied to sex, so female, male, and sometimes neutral. That's characteristic for Indo-European languages. It's actually the only language family which has this occurring naturally. Though some languages kind of developed it later, like Korean to some extent from contact with Western languages. It partly developed that. But what other types exist? For example, shit like Bantu. Of course, I don't remember again every single one they have. It's like animal, thing, third animal, shit like that. You can have grammatical gender like that. This also, I don't recommend having more than like 2 or 3 grammatical genders, because then you need to make a separate ending in the cases for everything. You need to make the separate plurals, etc. But it again can be useful in poetry because, like, if you want to write poetry, because it gives you the same endings for everything. But it also makes it easy, for example, classifying words like what is female, what is male. It can, having grammatical gender in your language, in like a fake made up language, can just fucking skyrocket the level of immersion you can make, because you can make very cultural decisions. For example, you can make a language for a race that worships death, and you have a grammatical gender for things that are living, things that are dead, and things that never lived. And it would be very telling about their culture if the planet was referred to as something dead, because that would imply that that culture believes that the planet once was a living being. Whereas if you grammatically classified the planet as something which never lived, it's just a normal object. In other words, grammatical gender is like one of the best ways to express a culture in a fantasy setting. Okay, next one. Grammar related to this type of thing. For example, one thing which argumentative languages sometimes do, which this ones do and this ones don't, is having reduplication as the way of making plurals. Reduplication is basically you say shit twice. Let's say moto means. So if you want to say 2 cats, you don't say cats or motos, you say moto moto. Some languages do that, and it can be pretty fun to give it an interesting feel. Other odd grammatical things we can do is grammatical feel. What the fuck would grammatical feel be? It's something that I find interesting. It was originally invented in a language called Latin, which was made by some sort of intersectional feminist. But unlike feminists now, that feminist was only retarded about women, not about literally everything else. Basically, it's a language which was supposed to be made for women, and the difference between normal languages and the language for women is it has grammatical conjugation of words and at the end of sentences which denote the emotional state of the one saying the thing. It's basically the disambiguation of feelings, which would seems like something that would be way more useful for men than women, considering that women are the ones that often confuse men with their feelings. And the other thing is, it could be also a nice touch on a fantasy race. One of the things about fantasy is, let's say, a race that has stunted emotional expression, let's say an insect race. If that insect race communicates with its non-insect people who, let's say, can smell their hormones, it would make sense to develop a way of formal speak or diplomatic speak in which the insects would include their own emotional state. It actually makes sense for settings with a lot of fantasy races where people can't that easily tell each other's facial expressions because of very different anatomies. So it could be, let's say, a way of very official speak. The other way, it could be for speak of a race which has a very high emphasis on feelings. Let's say high elves, because those seem to be usually pretty faggy. Another language which I find interesting is something called Tokipona. I think it's called like that. Yeah, Tokipona. It's a language whose purpose is to have as little roots, as little letters, and as little everything as possible. It's basically as minimalist as possible. It developed some very interesting grammatical quirks to make it work to some extent. And not to insult the Tokipona people, but I would use Tokipona actually as a language for a very, very intellectually challenged race. Let's say as a base for a language for orcs, because it can very precisely basically always hear the same sounds, and the way they speak would feel very forced because it's very limited in the way you can express things. So it seems something very good for a very limited mind. Another thing which can be used is Lojban. Lojban has again a very, very odd grammar because it's a language that's supposed to be a sign. It's basically extremely precise. Saying a sentence in Lojban, like shit like I want to get milk, would probably take you half a fucking page. Because there's so many prepositions, you have to add so much information. Of course, Lojban has those rules that you not always have to put this information, which means that you can to some extent use it in real speech. But I would put in Lojban for a race, let's say, similar to Vulcans. Because it's extremely logical, it can be extremely precise whenever you wish, and it just fucking sounds alien as horseshit. Other languages which can also be interesting is a mix of sign language and speaking. It's suspected that that's partly how Neanderthals talked, that they talked and also used some sort of sign language with their hands while they talked. This can be just used as an interesting cultural quirk, for example, for a race which has can't really pronounce shit well with their mouth. Of course, there's a lot of ways of making languages, but this is basically the very, very, very basic shit on grammar. And this is the end of the video. Goodbye.